In July of 2014, I was outside filming the forest behind my home in Revelstoke, British Columbia. Years later, upon reviewing the footage, I noticed a slender humanoid figure darting through the trees, which hadn't been visible to me at the time of my recording. It is very thin and has long arms and legs, as well as an elongated head with what appears to be antennae or horns on top. The being seems to be floating above ground, rather than walking. The creature is not clear enough for me to determine if it's male or female, but it does seem quite large, perhaps around 7 feet tall. I had never seen anything like this before, so naturally, I was shocked when I saw it. Since then, however, nothing strange has happened here. No other sightings or disturbances in our daily lives. Revelstoke itself isn't known for paranormal activity, although there are some legends about Sasquatch roaming these woods, especially since we're near Mount Begbie, where many people claim they've encountered Bigfoot-like creatures. In addition, there were rumors going around town about shadow people who would appear out of nowhere during nighttime hours, only vanishing again once daylight returned. Some people believe around here that those shadows might actually be interdimensional beings, while others believe they're just figments of overactive imaginations. Anyway, even though my sighting took place during daytime hours instead of nighttime ones, it still feels scary knowing something supernatural could exist right here close by. If you'd like more information, please let me know. Otherwise, thank you for any attention. I am a 25-year-old female and live in British Columbia. In my city, we are surrounded by mountains with plenty of wildlife all around us. My experience happened when I was about 17 years old, but it still haunts me today. When this happened, there were 3 other people with me who witnessed the same thing that night. I will start off by saying that all 4 of us were completely sober at the time, so drugs or alcohol had nothing to do with what we saw. It was late one summer evening, around midnight, and myself and 2 friends decided to drive up into the mountains on a road called the West Side. The West Side is known for its partying teenagers and bonfires, as well as drug deals, etc. We drove our vehicle up past all these people until eventually no one else could be seen anymore because they didn't dare venture any further due to lack of cell service. There is only one way in or out of where we went, which leads down towards civilization again through some pretty dense forest. As mentioned before, there were 4 witnesses, myself included. 1 male driver who owned the car, his girlfriend sitting beside him in the front seat, and another male friend behind the passenger seat next to her while I sat directly behind the driver. This area has lots of steep cliffs leading down into valleys below, so it's not uncommon for animals such as deer, bears, wolves, etc. to cross roads occasionally. But generally, most things stay away from human activity. After driving around aimlessly looking for somewhere secluded enough to park without being bothered, we finally found the perfect spot overlooking the valley below. The view was breathtaking, especially during sunset or sunrise hours. Anyway, once parked, everyone walked over the edge of the cliff to sit and watch the stars come out because the sky was clear that night. While sitting there chatting about random stuff, I noticed something moving near the tree line right across the valley. It appeared as a large black figure walking back and forth among trees. At first, I thought maybe it was a bear, but soon realized it was too tall to stand on all 4s. It looked more like a man in a gorilla suit walking around down there. We could see clearly enough to make out what seemed to be arms and legs, moving as if someone were wearing a costume of some sort. It was getting pretty dark by this point, so we decided to turn on the car lights, shine across the valley, and get a better look at whatever this thing was doing. We turned on the headlights and aimed them towards where the creature had been seen earlier. It stopped pacing back and forth suddenly and stood still for a moment before taking a few steps forward into the clearing, which gave us a clear view of its body now. Everyone gasped when they saw how huge this thing really was. It appeared to be 7 feet tall, standing up straight with broad shoulders and a thick neck, covered entirely in black fur, except for the face, which seemed to have less hair than the rest of the body. The face resembled that of a dog or a wolf and featured large ears, a pointed snout, and long fangs hanging down from its mouth. The most disturbing part, though, came next when I noticed the front paws, which previously thought were hands, reaching the door handle and trying to open the driver's side door. The male driver panicked quickly, put the vehicle in reverse, and nearly backed away as fast as he could without losing control, almost going over the edge of the cliff behind us. After reversing far enough away, he begins driving back down the road towards civilization again, never looking back. Once we reached the area, people parked vehicles, lit bonfires, went partying, etc., pulled off ourselves, just sat there and talked, trying to forget what had just happened. Eventually, we went home afterwards, not mentioning this incident to anyone until many years later. I know it sounds crazy, probably hard to believe, but I swear, a true story nonetheless. Thank you for reading this experience. I hope that it helps others who may encounter similar things in their own lives. I'm from Victoria, British Columbia, and I have had many experiences with astral projection and the like. It all started when I was 12 years old. I was at a sleepover with my best friend in her basement suite apartment. We were up late watching TV and just talking about life. Now, at one point or another, we decided to go to bed as it was getting pretty late. So, we turned off the TV, got into our sleeping bags on the floor of her living room, and said goodnight. As I closed my eyes, something strange happened. There were flashing lights behind my eyelids, which then formed an image of a woman standing beside me saying, "Wake up," over and over again. Suddenly, everything just went black for what felt like only a second, but it could have been longer. Next thing I knew, it wasn't dark anymore. The whole place lit up with this white light everywhere. Then, slowly, images began appearing before me. First, trees appeared, followed by mountains, lakes, and so on, eventually forming an entire landscape complete with animals running around doing their thing. It looked just like Earth, except not quite right somehow. It was kind of fuzzy looking, or maybe more dreamlike. Hard to describe exactly, but definitely different from reality. Out of nowhere, a huge wolf came bounding towards me through the woods and fields full of grassy hillsides covered with flowers blowing gently in some unseen breeze. Suddenly, he stopped dead, still staring straight at me with his piercing yellow eyes while snarling viciously and baring his teeth, dripping saliva everywhere. He seemed really angry, or maybe even evil, although honestly, it's hard to tell since he didn't move any closer. He just stood there, growling menacingly. All too quickly, those images faded away, leaving nothing behind except darkness once again. So, after opening my eyes and realizing where I actually was, back inside this little apartment, lying on the floor next to my friend's sleeping bag, who apparently hadn't noticed anything weird happening whatsoever during the time spent unconscious, I tried to tell her what had just happened. But she did not believe me. After that experience, I became obsessed with astral projection. In fact, for years, every night before bed, I would lie there and try to leave my body. Eventually, it worked. I remember the first time it happened so vividly. Suddenly, everything around me started vibrating very fast, like some kind of energy was building up inside of me. Then, all at once, this massive wave surged through every cell in my being, causing them to each explode into a million tiny pieces, then reassemble themselves back together again, instantaneously creating a new form which is identical to the previous one, except now separate from physical reality somehow. The feeling was incredible. And not only that, but it also felt very familiar, as if I had been here many times before, which makes sense since apparently we do travel out of our bodies while asleep or something similar, according to various spiritual teachings. Anyway, once fully separated, I could see myself lying on the floor below, looking down upon the sleeping figure with amazement, thinking, wow, is this real? Am I actually doing this right now? Then, I decided to explore my surroundings more closely. So, I floated over my friend's head and peered into her face, noticing how peaceful she looked while dreaming away, unaware of my presence nearby. Afterwards, I ventured outside the apartment door and found myself standing in the front yard, gazing at the stars above, listening to the sounds of the nighttime world surrounding me, such as crickets, frogs, owls hooting, and so on. I felt more deeply connected to nature than I ever had before. As days, weeks, months, and even years began to pass, I continued my practice of astral projection on a nightly basis, honing my skills, exploring different places, realms, dimensions, and encountering countless beings of both human and non-human origin, along with the many, as I will describe here. One particular entity stands out among the rest, just because its appearance and behavior were quite unusual compared to the others I had encountered previously. He called himself Wolf, due to his resemblance to a large wolf-like creature wearing a robe made of animal fur, feathers, bones, beads, and shells attached throughout, giving him the appearance of a shaman. Also carried a staff adorned with the same materials and had tightly held hands. He appeared much older than any other being I had encountered thus far. His eyes especially stood out. They seemed to contain an entire universe within them, filled with knowledge, wisdom, and understanding far beyond human comprehension. Although he never spoke directly, he telepathically conveyed messages that always sounded calm, soothing, and gentle. He would say things like, "You are loved, everything's going to be okay," or "Trust yourself, believe in your abilities." Each time we met, which happened quite often during our travels, in fact, we eventually became friends, even though I didn't know him in a physical sense. Since we existed on different planes of existence, we somehow managed to develop a deep bond nonetheless. One day, however, everything changed suddenly and without warning. He disappeared completely, leaving me feeling lost and confused. I wondered what had gone wrong, if anything at all. Honestly, I still don't really understand why he left or where he went, although I suspect he may have returned to his own realm, or perhaps simply moved on somewhere else entirely. So that's my story about astral projection experiences. I hope you find it interesting enough to share with others who might also enjoy reading about such things. Thanks again for taking the time to read this long, detailed story. I appreciate the opportunity. I have a very incredible, lengthy, and strange story to share with you. Strap in because it's a wild ride. For the past 15 years, my family and I have been living in the remote areas outside of British Columbia. Our property is situated about 20 minutes away from town, surrounded by large, majestic mountains, and no neighbors within a kilometer or two. It's a peaceful and secluded place, but it comes with its fair share of unexplained phenomena. One event, in particular, has stayed with me since it occurred about 5 years ago. My son, who was around 12 years old at the time, had invited some friends over for a camping trip in our field. Before heading down to town, I went outside to make sure they had everything they needed. As I scanned the surroundings, something caught my eye across our field. Nestled against a small hillside, amidst an old apple orchard filled with dead trees, was a large white tent. Now, let me tell you, those trees gave off an eerie vibe, and nobody ever ventured near them. It was strange to see such a massive tent set up in that spooky spot. My instincts kicked in, and as soon as my wife got home from work that evening, we decided to investigate this strange sight in broad daylight. We walked across our fields, getting closer to the tent. But the closer we got, the more puzzled I became. It seemed impossible for someone to have pitched such a colossal-sized tent among these ghostly apple trees. And how could they have transported all the materials without being seen? The whole situation just was not adding up. Undeterred, we pressed on until we reached the tent's location. But to our astonishment, it had vanished. Instead, we found ourselves standing in a lush green meadow, teeming with vibrant flowers and the sweet melodies of birds. It was like stepping into another dimension. We marveled at this breathtaking scenery. My wife noticed a pathway leading through the meadow. Curiosity piqued, we followed it until we arrived at an old stone building covered in ivy. Except for a small section that had been cleared, revealing a solid oak door, the structure was in ruins. With caution, my wife opened the wooden door, peering inside. She motioned for me to join her, whispering to me to come look. And there, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was our 12-year-old son. He was reading a book we had never seen before and wearing unfamiliar clothing. To say we were dumbfounded would be an understatement. We bombarded him with questions, demanding to know how he had ended up here and why everything seemed so different from just a few hours prior. He calmly explained that he had discovered a hidden door among the apple trees just a couple of years ago. Intrigued, he unlocked it with an old, rusty key he had found and transported him to this alternate dimension. He had spent countless hours exploring this place and decided to bring his friends here without informing us. Time worked differently in this realm, and while only a few minutes had passed for them, an entire day had gone by in our world. As we absorbed this mind-boggling information, my wife noticed something strange. She looked older. Confused, she asked our son about it. He explained that time flowed differently here, and people didn't age unless they permanently crossed over. Leaving this realm would disrupt the balance between both worlds, causing catastrophic events. We were left with more questions than answers. Did anyone else know about this place? What would happen if others found out? Our son mentioned that only those with a strong connection to nature might ever stumble upon similar portals, but most remained oblivious due to a lack of knowledge about interdimensional travel. The consequences were uncertain, as nobody had managed to escape back into our reality. Just a couple of days ago, some strangers claiming to be from the future showed up, warning us of impending disasters caused by tampering with dimensional gateways worldwide. It's hard to know what to believe, given recent events at home. I apologize for the length of this email, but I wanted to provide you with every detail. It may sound far-fetched, I understand that, but sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. Take care, and let me know if you have any thoughts on this strange phenomena. I believe we had discovered a portal that led us to another time, but I'm not sure. Please bear with me. This story is about my experiences with the paranormal, specifically encounters with reptilian beings. I'm an 18-year-old living in British Columbia. Throughout my life, I've had numerous encounters with the supernatural, but the reoccurring theme of encountering reptilian beings has particularly stood out to me. The first incident happened when I was around 14. It was just a regular night, and I went to bed around midnight after some music and then fell asleep. At that time, we were living in an apartment complex right near the King George SkyTrain station in downtown. My room faced the parking lot area, surrounded by trees. Around 3 a.m, I suddenly woke up for no apparent reason. I found myself wide awake, scanning my room when something grabbed my attention right outside the window. Behind the tree, I saw what appeared to be a person with red eyes, except they were peering into my bedroom through the blinds. As soon as they noticed me noticing them, they quickly vanished behind another branch. I thought I was still half asleep, or imagining things since nothing strange had happened before. But seeing a face staring at me from outside and then vanishing into the darkness made it impossible to fall asleep. About 10 minutes goes by. The figure pops its head out again. This time, next to where it had been before. It had both hands holding onto either side of its face, revealing large pointed ears that stuck straight up. These ears were not long and elf-like, like you would imagine, but rather short and stout, pointing upwards. It's hard to explain. As you can imagine, being woken up by someone peering into your bedroom window, followed by them popping their head out again to ensure you saw them, it didn't help calm my fears. Now, on to the second part. After that strange incident, not much else happened until several months later when I stayed over at a friend's house near our old apartment complex. This was when I first met him, and we quickly became friends. He had also experienced many paranormal occurrences, but that's a story for another time. We were up late watching movies in his living room, which was adjacent to his bedroom where he slept with his 2 younger brothers. I began dozing off while my friend stayed awake, engrossed in a movie. Later that night, after I had fallen asleep, he noticed something odd happening inside their home. He told me that red beings would walk into his bedroom from the hallway, stand there and stare at him, before eventually leaving through the same door they had entered. When he shared this with me, all the memories of my own encounter months ago came rushing back. It wasn't just a dream or my imagination. Someone else had seen them too. But it did not end there. The third occurrence took place shortly after we moved into a new home, when I was 15. The house had 3 floors, the basement being the lowest level. The main floor consisting of the kitchen, dining room, and living area, and the upstairs housing the bedrooms, including mine. One night during summer break, everyone downstairs watching TV decided to go to bed early. I made my way up the stairs, locked myself in my room, and felt safe knowing that no one can enter unless they broke the window. But guess who showed up again? Those darn reptilians. This time, they appeared outside my window, peering through the blinds just like before. Except this time, they vanished. hiding behind the tree branches. However, one of them remained still, maintaining eye contact with me for what felt like an eternity. The emotions that overwhelmed me were indescribable. It felt as if this being had complete control over my mind, a sensation I had never experienced before and haven't since. It stood there, staring at me with its piercing red eyes, almost hypnotizing me and instilling intense fear within my whole being. Eventually, I managed to break free from its grasp, rushing out of the room, screaming and waking up everyone in the house. After explaining what had happened, they did not believe the story, but still decided to sleep in their bedrooms to avoid any potential nightmares. But guess what happened? You guessed it. This time, instead of being outside the window, they were inside the house. I found myself standing at the front door, peering into the living area where my family slept, after informing them about the events of the previous night. It seemed like these beings wanted something more than just to scare me half to death. Otherwise, why would they continue appearing despite our efforts to ignore their existence altogether? I lost count of how many times I saw them afterward, but each occurrence became less terrifying than the last. The initial shock wore off quickly, and I realized they wouldn't harm anyone unless provoked, or so I hoped. These experiences have left a lasting impression, completely changing my perspective on the world around me and my beliefs regarding extraterrestrial beings and other paranormal phenomena. I'm curious to know your thoughts on this subject matter. Have you ever come across similar stories or encountered anything resembling the description that I've shared with you here today? I appreciate your platform for sharing these stories and discussing the unexplained. My friend and I embarked on a trip that we had been planning for months, driving from Alberta to British Columbia through the Rocky Mountains. We set off from Edmonton around 10 in the morning on a sunny morning in late June of 2014. By noon, we had reached Jasper National Park and decided to stop at the visitor center before continuing our journey along Highway 16, also known as the Yellowhead Highway, towards Prince George. The weather was perfect, clear blue skies overhead as we drove past Mount Robson Provincial Park, which marks the border between British Columbia and Alberta. As we continued westward through Valemount, we made a pit stop for lunch. It was around 2:30 in the afternoon, and we enjoyed the sandwiches my friend had packed earlier that day. After our meal, my friend took over driving while I relaxed in the passenger seat, listening to music on my iPod. I gazed out the window, captivated by the breathtaking sight of snow-covered mountains. It was a privilege to witness such majestic scenery this close up. Suddenly, something caught my attention, reflecting sunlight into our car's headlights. It startled me, as I had not expected to encounter anything lurking by the roadside in such a remote and mountainous area. As soon as I saw what appeared to be large red eyes staring directly at us, I realized that the creature must be standing on two legs. The way the eyes reflected the light from above instead of the ground indicated that it wasn't crouched down. I exclaimed and pointed in the creature's direction, urging my friend to look. Unfortunately, he did not respond fast enough to notice what I was talking about until a few seconds after, when he finally turned his head towards the window. Seeing his reaction only reassured me that I wasn't the only one who had witnessed those eerie, glowing eyes. However, I couldn't understand why he hadn't noticed them any sooner, since they seemed quite obvious once I saw them myself. The creature took a few steps forward towards the road before stopping altogether just short of the grassy shoulder. It stood there, watching us drive by. Its dark gray color and black stripes along its back legs resembled those of a wolf, but its fur appeared thicker than that of a normal canine. It almost seemed as if it had puffed up its fur to appear larger, perhaps to intimidate potential predators. What truly unnerved me about this creature was not just its bright red eyes locked onto mine or its imposing size as it stood alone beside the highway. It was the way it turned its head slowly from side to side, scanning the area around in an almost robotic fashion. It gave off a devilish, sinister vibe, making it seem more like a machine than a living, breathing organism. Neither my friend nor I had any knowledge of a creature known as the Dogman at that time. So, when we first encountered it, we believed it to be some kind of bizarre mutant hybrid between a man and a dog. We had never seen anything quite like it before, nor had we heard any stories of people encountering such creatures. With the desire to document our encounter, in case nobody else ever came across the same thing in the future, we decided to turn the car around and try to get a better look. However, my friend hesitated to turn the car around immediately. In hindsight, can you blame him? He wanted to find a safe spot to pull over and park without causing an accident, as there were other vehicles present on the roadway behind us and in front of him. I have no idea if these other vehicles witnessed what we did. Given the speed at which he had been traveling earlier during the trip, it was too close for comfort. After several minutes of searching, we finally spotted a large turnout next to the entrance of a gravel logging road, leading into a deep forest. It seemed like the perfect location to take pictures and video of whatever might be waiting. Once we parked, I grabbed my camera and began recording everything I could, capturing the surrounding landscape in hopes of catching a glimpse of any lurking shadows in the trees. I then focused my attention on the roadside, expecting the creature to reappear at any moment. Unfortunately, it never did. Frustrated, I decided to explore the area myself, hoping to find any evidence that would prove I wasn't simply imagining things, but had actually encountered a real, living creature. Armed with my flashlight, I began searching through the underbrush along the side ditch, looking for footprints, hair samples, or anything else that might indicate the presence of the creature. Meanwhile, my friend stayed behind in the car, keeping watch in case something unexpected happened during my search. Well, it didn't take long before I stumbled upon several large tracks embedded in the mud. They led away from the road towards the thick woods nearby. This seemed like the best lead I had so far in finding physical proof of this creature's existence. After following the tracks for roughly 100 yards, I arrived at a small clearing that was surrounded by dense forestry. In the clearing, I made a startling discovery. There lay a freshly killed deer carcass on the ground, ripped to shreds and eaten, likely by coyotes, but due to the level of blood and carnage, this looked far worse, perhaps a bear. However, what caught my attention was the fact that the head had not been torn in pieces. Instead, it seemed as if someone had carefully dissected the head, removing the brain and eyes while leaving the rest untouched. The precision implied that whoever was responsible knew exactly what they were doing, almost like a surgical procedure, to avoid leaving obvious signs of struggle and attract unwanted attention from other predators or scavengers in the vicinity. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise coming from the direction of the clearing. I turned my flashlight towards it and saw this creature standing at the edge, staring directly at me with the same eyes. The beam of my light hit it, illuminating it, making it appear even more sinister than before. The complete and total wave of dread and fear that washed over me is beyond anything I could possibly describe. It was pure, unadulterated primal fear. In fact, it was so bad, my body reacted. I didn't have time to think. The feeling I got from it when it looked at me, with those eyes and expression full of malice and hate, was, "You shouldn't be here. Why are you here? You've seen too much." It didn't say that to me, but if it could have talked, that's what it would have said. My body ran as fast as it could back towards the car. I jumped in, told my friend to gun it. He didn't have to think twice about what I said. My expression and body was pale and scared enough to know that I meant business. As soon as we flew away down the road, I felt like I went in and out of consciousness, as if this being, whatever it was, had marked me in some way or another. It's really hard to describe, but since then, I've had horrific nightmares, strange feelings of not being alone, and always feeling watched and paranoid when I'm out. Sure, it might just be trauma from the incident, but I feel like it's so much more. I didn't mention this before, but I've had a pretty traumatic upbringing, and this is nothing like that. Nothing at all like the physical abuse I endured as a child. This is far worse, 100 times worse. Lastly, I want to touch upon the fact that you're probably going to get angry at me. I had a camera with me, but I want you to understand, as soon as that thing came into the clearing and made eye contact with me, it did something to me physically, psychologically. It's like it took over my being. I never once had the thought of, "Oh, I should take a picture of it." My body, my entire being, simply reacted. I'm sorry there isn't more to my story, but that's about it. I'm still living with the trauma from this, and even now, I feel like writing this is almost cathartic for me. It's definitely a form of therapy, although it doesn't fully alleviate the trauma. Well, that's pretty much the end of my story. Feel free to reach back out if you have any questions, or if your viewers want to know anything else, assuming you read this to them. Thank you.